Shalom and welcome to another edition of our Daily Bread, where we discuss the weekly Torah portion. This week's Parashat is the third Parashat of the book of Vayikra, also called Leviticus, and it's called Shemini, which means eighth. This week's Parashat, my message for 2012-13, is called The Fear of YHWH. And this week's Parashat starts, it's in Leviticus 9:1 through 11:47, and then the half Torah is in 2 Samuel, or Shemuel, 6:1 through 7:17. And this week's, just to give you a quick rundown of what happens in this week's Parashat, we have, again, we finished up last week with the priests staying in the tabernacle 7 days, and now we're getting to the 8th day, the time when we're going to make the final offerings. They're going to give sin offerings, peace offerings, burnt offerings, and then the presence of YHWH is going to come and dwell in the tabernacle. So this is a very big moment. And then in the middle we get the problem with Nadav and Avihu, Aharon's sons, who get burnt up for offering strange fire. Then we get into the kosher laws at the end there, and then we get with the half Torah two key elements. One is the Uzzah touching the ark and King David being afraid then to keep moving the ark, to bring the ark into the city. And then we get Michal, who talks against King David and is cursed. So, you know, all these things point into this concept of the fear of YHWH. Now, of course, the scriptures, the Torah teaches us, that the fear of YHWH is the beginning of wisdom. And so it's interesting, because we think of wisdom in that scope as the end goal, right? I mean, we have the knowledge, we have information, then we have knowledge, and then we have understanding, and then we have wisdom. And that's a high thing to strive for. And yet it says that the fear of YHWH is the beginning of wisdom. And so it's interesting, because we're going to see how fear is important both in the beginning and in the end. And we're going to see the duality of that. And let's start off by talking about the presence of YHWH. This week's Parashat falls, we're on the Feast of Unleavened Bread this year, so it's falling right here during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and which is fitting. It's Pesach season, and Pesach season and all these things are interesting, because we start talking about the 4 cups, which are derived from Exodus 6:6. Now, the 4th cup, I shall take you to me or to be my people, and I will be your Elohim. This is the cup we believe that Mashiach talks about when he says that I will not drink again until I drink this new with you in the kingdom. I believe that represents the 4th cup that's not drank, because it's the cup of completion. It's the cup that we haven't got there yet. So hopefully when we're dwelling with him and God is among us, as a matter of fact, even the name Emmanuel, God among us, is tied to Mashiach. And this, he is that, at the same time, that mediator who brings that to happen, who brings us out, just like Moshe, from Mitzrayim and from the world and into the Father's kingdom, into the promised land. And so a lot of very interesting things. But when we're talking about the presence of YHWH, we see that this is very important, because having YHWH dwell among us, this is the concept of the 8th day, right? You have 6 days, which could be 6,000 years, right? Then the 1,000-year millennium, which represents the Sabbath, and then the 8th day, that's the beginning of the new thing, right? The next week, the next 7,000 years. And this concept is a concept of dwelling in the kingdom. We get on the 8th day that animals, right? 7 days with the dam, with its mother, and then the 8th day, you can take it. Same thing with circumcision happening on the 8th day. This is this time where it's 8 days you're in the flesh, right? You are coming, and then that changes on the 8th day. 8th day, this is a union, a symbol of your now connection to the covenant, which is this concept of dwelling with God. It's the same thing. All these patterns overlap each other. So this Shemini, this 8th day, this is very relevant, very important. And what we see here is that the presence of YHWH, though, I hear many times people saying, come Mashiach now, and even in our day. And I'm thinking, no, I don't know that would be a good thing for me. Because a lot of people, they're justified, they think, well, when Mashiach returns, when God dwells among us, I'm going to get rewards. I'm going to get high fives. I'm going to be, they don't think that they're going to get punished. And what we see with Israel is that there's many times, and we see it twice in this parashah, where God being among you is a scary and dangerous thing. Look at the people. People, it's just like people talking about, over this last week, people talking about, God, told me to say this, or God's having a conversation with me, or God reminded me of that. When I hear these things that people say, I have a very hard time believing them. Because what I have from the scriptures is that God talked to the actual children of Israel, the ones who saw Moshe, who are written of in the Bible, who saw the smoke on the mount, who had all these miracles done, right? Here's these people who have much more authentic interaction with God. And you know what happened when God just spoke to them just a little bit? They thought they were going to die. I mean, they thought they were going to die just standing still. So I don't hear that in the stories of people who say, oh yeah, God wanted me to tell you this, or I've got this ministry that God told me to do, and all this and that. I don't hear in their stories, in their witness, how I thought I was actually going to die. I can't believe I'm alive. It scared me. I was shaking for 5 hours. All this. I don't hear any of that kind of stuff. It's just like, oh yeah, God just told me this, and it's like I gotta kind of call BS on that, because that doesn't fit the pattern of when God talks. Even when God sends an angel or a messenger, people think they're going to die. It's a traumatic, life-changing event, aside from the message that they're actually given, and a terrifying event. So when we talk about the presence of God coming among the camp, right, that can be just like it was when God originally dwelt among the people. You know what happened? God continually plagued them, wiped them out for their wickedness while He was among them. At one point had to go outside the camp, right? So when God's among us, guess what happens? You're gathering kindling on the Sabbath, boom, stone them to death, right? Somebody offers up a strange fire, boom, fire comes out and burns them up on the spot. Now, anybody else in the crowd want to offer something I didn't say? Anybody want to do something different? No. People probably stepped right up, realized, wow, the high priest's sons, half of his sons were just killed for doing something they weren't supposed to. How much more me, who's standing here doing whatever? Whether you're the people or you're another priest, it wakes you up. It makes you pay attention to how serious things are. See, that's the pattern we get in the scriptures. We don't get this pattern of, hey, I'll boldly go to the throne. Oh, people talk about going into the Holy of Holies. Are you kidding me? The high priest, Aharon, who's written about here, was told, don't come in at all times into the Holy of Holies, lest you die. In this week's Parashat, he's told, don't drink strong drink or wine when you're going in to serve, lest you die. You see? These are serious things that are being told to people who are in serious positions. King David, he was afraid. He's the king and probably the greatest king of all Yisrael. Beloved of YHWH. And he's afraid. If he's afraid, people who have close interactions, if Moshe falls on his face and is fearful, who stood before the presence of Elohim, if he's afraid, why should we not be afraid? You see, he goes with fear and trembling. We don't. That's the problem. People nowadays, they think that they have this real casual relationship with God, and that, they're pretty much guaranteed, and they're the children of God, and God's going to high-five them, and He's already selected them. Really, they've just selected themselves. Really, they've justified themselves. Really, they've told themselves that they're great and that they're going to get rewards. And that's why they want to see God come back, because God's going to certainly see their value and come back. And they have no fear of God coming back. They have no fear in their own works and deeds that they might not be acceptable. And this is a problem. The presence of YHWH is a very serious thing. I mean, right now, we have mercy because we're making mistakes, right? Somebody's doing something they're not supposed to do on the Sabbath. They're not getting burned up on the spot or taken out to the side of the camp and stoned to death. We have mercy right now because the presence of YHWH isn't among us, because we're not worthy to have His presence among us. And if His presence did come, I would guess that many people would perish. Many people. I may perish. I'm sure I'm not prepared. I'm not holy and righteous enough. You see, the whole beginning of this week's Parashat is about getting things right. I mean, think about all the work that went, Betzalel and the Holy Elf, all of the things that were made, the details had to be perfect. Everything was done, the offerings, all this just to build the house. We haven't even got to the priest. Now, Leviticus, Vayikra, we're getting to the priest. Now they have to have the offerings. They have to have the clothes just right. They have to have everything right. God isn't coming down to dwell among His people until all this stuff is right. And yet people think they, being flawed, not made after the pattern, they, being unclean, being all kinds of wicked, that God's dwelling among them. Oh, I got the Holy Spirit. Well, really? Does it dwell in unclean things? Right? Did you feel you were going to die? Moshe, Aharon couldn't go into the tabernacle. When the presence of YHWH came down in the tabernacle, they couldn't go in. They were driven out, and they're written of in this book. But you think that the presence of YHWH, it's just coming in and dwelling in you, even though you're still eating unclean food and being sloppy with your kosher laws. You think He'll dwell in your unclean tabernacle. You think even though you're full of sin, you and Mashiach are one. And, I'm one in Him and He's one in me. You think He's going to come back and reward you and tell you how great you are. It's ridiculous. It's really ridiculous. You haven't seen the standard? Mashiach's the standard. He's the living Torah. You haven't seen Him. If you saw Him, as it says, show Him the temple that they may be ashamed. If you saw the great standard that the priests went through, if you saw the high priests, right? Out of all of Israel, some of the holiest people, most set apart people, His sons, the sons of Aharon, who were given those positions, who would step up into those holy roles above priests, above the children of Israel, in the highest of ranks. When you saw them, King David, when you saw him afraid and terrified, maybe then you'd realize how afraid you should be. When you saw people getting burned up or put to death over making a mistake in the way they were doing things, maybe then you would realize that how you do things matters. You wouldn't be walking around telling yourself that you're going to boldly go to the throne and that God's dwelling in you. I think that needs to be a little bit of a reality check here. You study that word. The patterns aren't that God dwells among the unclean. The patterns are, even when He's among His children of Israel and they're being wicked and unclean, He's among His people, destroying them, plaguing them, killing them, having the earth open up and swallow them. Okay? That's God doing that to His people for their wickedness. Not saying, hey, that's cool, no problem, you and me are one. It's, why don't I destroy all of these people and I'll start over with you, Moshe. Right? All of them destroyed. And they can sit down there and say, hey, but we're the children of Israel. Hey, we're God's children. Hey, didn't you know God brought us out of Mitzrayim? I mean, doesn't that make us special? So special we can turn around and sin before God and think nothing will happen? You got to be crazy. If you're in the presence of God, just as this week's Parashat teaches us, you better be holy because He's holy. Right? That's the fear of YHWH. Beginning of wisdom is understanding that you're wicked and you have no place. You are not clean enough nor righteous enough to expect to even be close to God and dwell in His presence without receiving great punishment. I know I'm not. If God calls me up, I'm going to be afraid that I couldn't even take 2 steps closer to Him without getting burned up for all my foolishness and my wickedness, my laziness. Meanwhile, a couple people think they're going to run right up into the Holy of Holies. Well, after they get burnt up, like Nadab and Abihu, people will stop running up. Because then they will again have the fear of YHWH. You see, the patterns that we see is that all this has to be clean and holy before God's presence comes down. And that takes us that takes us to the next part, which is the instruction of YHWH. Everything has to be done first. Instructions given first on how to build the parts. Instructions given on the offerings. Instruction, then the people are responsible. Instruction given, responsibility of the people, then the result, the reward of God, which will be He'll reward those who do it wrong and do wickedness with punishment, and He'll reward those who do it right with blessing. You see, just like He says. He comes with His reward, and He's going to give to everybody according to their deeds. Doesn't say He's going to go, well, I'm not going to give anything bad to these guys because they were Kohanim or priests, or they were of the seed of Aharon, or they're a tribe of the children. None of that stuff matters. What's being judged is the deeds that they were supposed to do based on the instruction that was given. Now, that's how all life is. Instruction given, our responsibility, and then the judgment for our choices. It's a very simple pattern. Anybody who teaches you theology that somehow doesn't make that the foundation, they're not in alignment with the book. Okay? Because that's the story of the book. From the very beginning to the very end. From Bereshit to Revelations. Okay? We have the Word of God, which created all things. The instructions given to mankind. Right there at Adam, all the way through the end when it says He's going to open up the book of life and judge everyone according to their deeds. Nothing changes. Nothing's going to change. And if you're walking around thinking that your deeds don't matter, that you've got salvation, that you believe in Jesus, whatever you want to call it, that you're Jewish so that somehow gives you an extra in with God, or you're the seed of Abraham, I don't care what it is. None of that stuff is going to hold any water when you stand before the presence of YHWH. Righteousness is what can survive the fire. Purity, right? All the impurities, they're going to be removed as the heat comes up, as the testing and the great burning that it must be to stand in the presence of YHWH. I cannot even imagine it. And how, if most of what we are is impurity, then guess what gets burnt away? We do. Some of the holiest people, the set-apart people, people who were trained like Aharon's sons Nadab and Abihu, who were trained directly from in the holiest of things, in the holiest of places, with the holy instruction. They were trained by hand by Aharon the high priest, by Moshe, which came right from the Word of God. They saw the miracles, they did the things, they were raised in it. And you think somehow you're better than they are? Thousands of years removed? Never seen any of that? Not knowing the instruction? Not being taught by hand by some of the holiest people that exist in the Scriptures? I think it's a delusion. I think we have a lot to learn, and we need the correct context to understand where we are, the specks of dust that we are, and what we need to do, and the responsibility that still comes from even being a speck of dust. You see, at the top or the bottom doesn't matter. You're dealing with the Holy One of Yisrael, the Creator of the universe. Then it starts with fear, because fear is just an awareness. That's where it starts. Some people are unaware. It's like a child. A child doesn't have fear. They walk towards those steps, the parents is looking like, oh my goodness. They come screaming, running over there, no, no, no. Or they pick up a knife, or they're putting their finger in an outlet or something like that. You know, parents freaking out. Why? Because the parents are more aware than the child. The child will kill himself because his lack of awareness. They don't have fear. And the same thing happens spiritually. When you don't know the scriptures, when you haven't studied well enough, you lack enough basic knowledge to understand how much you should fear YHWH. But people think, oh, but he's my father, and you know what? There's different roles in a relationship. You know, my children, I can love them. There's that part of the relationship, right? I can be friendly with them, and I can also correct them. And there's a time when they should be afraid. As a matter of fact, when they're making choices that they know will bring correction, they should be afraid. That's when you hope. That fear is a safety mechanism. That fear is a mechanism that's going to keep them from utter destruction. When they're about to do something like play with a knife or something that could kill them or somebody else, they should be afraid to. I hope they're afraid. I hope they have that fear and respect that they know they're doing something they shouldn't do. Why? Why do I tell them to stay away and never touch a knife? Why? Because I love them. And I hope at that moment that fear is the foundation. Because we don't make choices based on love. We don't just choose the right things because we're such nice people. It doesn't work that way. When it comes to sin, we do things because we're selfish and we're rebellious. And that's when fear's still there, right? I mean, they may decide, it's great if they decide, hey, I want to listen to my daddy. I don't want to do that because, you know, I love my dad. But if that fails, then I hope they're afraid of the punishment. I hope they think, yeah, but if I do that, my dad's going to be really upset and I'm going to get, you know, in big trouble. Okay, I can take that too. That's the last line of defense. Because when they no longer care about the consequences, when they get to the lowest part like we are, right, as people who claim to be God's children, who run around saying and thinking actually that God isn't even going to be angry at them when they do something that's wrong. I mean, that's the type of stupid teaching that's going on in the religious world. Right? I mean, look at Judaism. I mean, you've got Israel, you've got Jewish people, many of them who are secular, who are homosexual. We see that all the time in Christianity. Homosexual pastors, are you kidding me? Homosexual Jews? Really? It's an abomination. Nothing's changed. God hates that. And to think that you're going to do that in front of Him and not be punished, that's a delusion. To flaunt it. To do what you want. To sin before God and then do it with no fear and thinking that He's actually okay with it. That is the most dangerous place you could be. That is like Nadav and Avihu coming up and doing something that they shouldn't be doing in the presence of the Creator of the universe. They weren't thinking. I don't know what they were thinking. But they didn't have the fear of YHWH, and they should have, because if they would have, they'd still be alive. So we need a bit of a reality check. And you know how a reality check happens there when God's among us? Because people get killed. Then everyone's like, oh, okay. Right? Oh, now I'll be a little more careful. I'm not going to do that. I'm not even get close to doing that. I don't want to end up like that. Right? But what good is that to the person who, like Nadav and Avihu, who already destroyed? Right? The fear of YHWH before you're receiving the punishment, that's when it saves you. Everyone can be afraid after it's all said and done. After they've been punished or other people have been punished for it, then okay. But the wise person that has that fear before, so that they never get to that point. You see, it's one thing to have a fear before, when you're afraid, and then you also have to have the fear after. See, they had this problem. They were doing everything, all this and that, to prepare. But then once God's presence was there, it's easy to get comfortable with things. It's easy in relationships to get comfortable. Get so comfortable that you lose respect and you lose fear. Happens to us all the time. You know, it's like a relationship. People act, nice and do what they should, trying not to be displeasing when they're getting to know each other. And then you have marriages and relationships that now, anything goes. I'll just say, whatever I want, mean and nasty things, and somehow it's okay because they've gotten more familiar and they don't understand. We see, even with in the story of Esther. Shall a queen decide that, hey, I can do whatever I want because I'm the queen? No. Just like Israel can't say, hey, I can do whatever I want. Now we're in the promised land. Hey, we did everything right. We worked on, but now we're probably good. So they start going into idolatry. It happens over and over, as it says. Now that you are fed and you are full, you'll forget Elohim. You see? Just like he says. Right? Israel doesn't know their master. If he is the master, where's his honor? Where's his fear? If a lion roared, you'd be afraid. And how much greater is God than a lion? If the king of all kings, right? If you were standing before a king and you didn't bow down and fall down on your face, you might be, in traditional times, put to death. How much more so the king of all kings? People pray, they don't bow their head even, let alone put their face down upon the ground and show respect. You see, after a couple people get put to death, you're going to learn, again the hard way, for some too late, what it means to fear somebody. And so it's that fear in preparation that you have is good fear. In the beginning, when people start following Torah, they're very zealous. And then after a while, they can slide right back into their sin. And we need to remember that first love. We need to remember that first fear that we had. And have that fear both before. The two dangers are you don't have enough fear when you're ignorant. And then when you're not ignorant, then you don't have enough fear. Okay? When you're ignorant, you should have fear. And when you're more aware, you should have more fear. Because fear is not a negative fruit. Fear is a great fruit. It's a love and a respect. No matter what relationship you have with God, you need to make sure that fears and respect are still there. Because He's not like you. He's not your buddy. He's not your equal. He's not your peer. He's not your homeboy. Okay? He's the King of the universe. And with that, He deserves respect and fear. And no matter what relationship you have, look at all the relationships that people have with God. They were afraid of Him. The people like Abraham and Moshe, people who He was very close to, had that. And you should also. And that's what we get in this week's half Torah at the end. Michal is disrespectful. First of all, she's a woman. Second of all, he's the king of Israel. So there's no way, and I see it all the time on Facebook the same way too. Right? There's roles that God sets up. Okay? The priests are in a position different than the common person. He sets them apart, just like the holy things. They're not common things. Someone's not going up and lighting their cigarette off the menorah. They're not washing their dog in the holy laver. They're not going to make some s'mores on the altar. Are you kidding me? You're not going to graffiti on the wall of the temple. There's a good chance God might just burn you up on the spot for such foolishness. Okay? The fact is, God's things are holy. We see that with Uzzah touching the ark. Ark shouldn't have been on a cart. We are commanded that there's stabs in the ark that it's to be bore with. Not a cart, not an ark. So if you say, oh, well, it was shaking. Well, why was it shaking? Because you weren't following the instructions. Should have had people carrying it. Okay? And just like many things, when you start with a sin, when you're not following the instructions, a whole bunch of other trouble comes into it. So just like Hava, right? She blames the serpent. Man blames Hava. None of them were doing what they were supposed to be doing. Why were they there? Why were they talking to the serpent? Why were they touching the food that they weren't even supposed to touch? Okay? When you seek after righteousness, when you listen and obey His words, they keep you out of trouble. They're a light for your path. But when you're not obeying, so many other things can come in. And you can try and think that, oh, you know, that's just the world. Well, it isn't other things. You have a responsibility. It's one of the biggest things that I have, biggest problems I have with a lot of bad theologies out there right now, is they are no responsibility theology. People talk about, oh, we're not under the law, we're under grace. You know, it's like, what does that mean? You can tell me all the words you want. Does it mean you're not responsible for what you do? Because if it is, no thank you. I'm responsible for my choices, my actions, and my words. Right? We learn here, right? With Michal. She said something. She said something. Remember Miriam getting leprosy? She spoke. Why were you not afraid to speak against my servant? Fear was what was lacking. Right? Here's a woman who, Michal, who was cursed then to have no children to the day she dies. Because she spoke to the king in a way that was inappropriate. If that's the relationship and that's how God treats someone who is a person among Israel with the king of Israel, how much more is the relationship between us and God, who's much greater than King David? Now we're taking a huge step up. So do you think He's going to be casual about the things that we say about Him and do in front of Him? Or do you think He's going to be even more serious? And do you think there'll be repercussions? Right? Don't take my name in vain. That's a big enough deal to get it in the top list of commandments for the whole universe. That's a pretty big deal. But people treat things lightly. Okay? So we look at these roles and we say that the priest has a relationship with God above them and with the people they're serving beneath them. They just can't do what they want. They've given an authority and people can't do what they want towards a priest. The priest can't do what he wants towards the people or towards God. People can't do what they want towards the priest or towards God. And all of those roles have been set up. Instructions been given about those roles. Husband, wives, and children. God, king, and people. All these roles, all these things have the same thing in common. That they're boundaries. Like the trespass offering. The concept of trespassing. Going beyond something. Going somewhere you're not supposed to. Not respecting the boundaries. Right? In this week's parasha, we learn about kosher eating, right? And the defilement that comes because God set boundaries. Upon our mouth is a boundary. It divides what goes in and what comes out. And our mind must look at the things and then measure them with the boundaries of God and see, okay, does it cloven hoof? Does it chew the cud? Okay, that's acceptable to come in. Guess what's not acceptable to come in? Certain things. And when you take something that is not supposed to come in, put it inside your body, you become unclean. you've defiled it by not respecting boundaries. Right? And in the same way, people think that they can be unclean, that they're not keeping the commandments of God, and that somehow though God's going to come to defile them. Guess what? That's like a harlot who not only is defiled, but then wants to go and defile everybody else. Defile the people who aren't defiled yet. She's spreading that defilement around. And that's how a lot of people are when it comes spiritually. They would like to defile the kingdom. They would like to defile God. How can God dwell in me if I'm unclean? Would I want that? Would I want to run up to the temple, having all my troubles and all my sins, and defile such a holy place? Or would I defer and say, I probably shouldn't go up? How many people want in the kingdom? And they don't have good judgment. They don't have the judgment of God. They haven't learned that yet. And so for them going into the kingdom, they just defile it. Really? The guy who can't even figure out how to eat clean and unclean, he's still going out to eat, ordering stuff from kitchens and with ingredients that are touching other unclean things. If you can't even get that down, you want to come into the kingdom and take that sin and that casualness and bring it into the kingdom and teach other people who might be doing it right there and defile them. It's just like disease. Sin's like a virus. Instead of staying quarantined and staying outside the camp and saying, like the leper covers their mouth and says, unclean, unclean, right? Letting everyone around know him, don't touch me. I'm unclean. Oh, maybe they just want to go in there and sneak back into the camp and say, hey, I'm okay. Meanwhile, they're defiling everything they're touching, all the people around them that were clean, with their delusion of cleanliness. It's a delusion. So we have roles. Men and women have roles. I see that one all the time. See it on. I've seen it in person. I've gone to congregations where I'll be talking with somebody and some lady butts in and starts trying to correct me and do all this and that. And I'm thinking, aside from everything else, as she's starting to blow a gasket and tell me how I need to go do this and I should go talk to a rabbi and blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm thinking, what a shame. This woman was unmarried, but sometimes I've seen it before. I've seen the women who run around and the husband's the docile one and they're the dominant one and the roles are all messed up. That's a sin. That's a sin in the scriptures. It even talks about that. We have a problem from the very beginning of a problem of people not staying in their roles. What happened? Chava takes from the lowest, the serpent, instead of listening to her husband and to God. She's not listening to the ones who are in authority over her. She's listening to herself and to things that are crawling around on their belly. She made them her authority. And the serpent, the easy way to do that is, hey, you don't have to listen to me. Just listen to yourself, right? You want this. This will benefit you, right? Because we put ourselves above God. That's the ultimate sin. An idol is just something we made because we want to form God, not God formed us. We'll make him look this way. We'll decide what he's telling me. Oh, he wants me to start this ministry over here. Right? We like it when God can't talk back because that makes us God. And our creation, which is the idol or our belief of God, serves us. Right? It's self-serving. That's why a lot of these bad theologies, you can tell that they come from a place of self-serving. If someone tells you, oh, well, we're saved, we keep the Torah because we're saved, Basically, hey, what they're really saying is, hey, I'm going to get the big reward. As a secondary thing, I'll obey. But I'm set. I'm important. I'm saved. I got this great relationship with God. Blah, blah, blah. It's really a no responsibility. Because the opposite of that is, I don't know, just as the scriptures say, I will wait and quietly hope in the salvation of YHWH. That's what it says. I don't know. I guess waiting and hoping. But if you say that to a lot of people, they'll say, you don't know you're saved? Well, it must be you don't have strong enough faith. Or you don't believe the scriptures that say this. No, I do believe the scriptures. And so I'll wait and quietly hope for the salvation of YHWH. And I'll know I don't deserve it. And I'll know that my wicked deeds matter, and the choices that I make matter, and I'll work my butt off in order to try and learn to do what's right, in order to be echad with the Word of God. As Mashiach said, I would that you were one with me as I am one with the Father. Yeah, working on it. Not there. Okay? And in fear, in knowing that if God's presence came down now, I'd probably be turned into nothing. Because that's what I deserve. And that's what is just. Do I want God to be unjust? And say to the person who is wicked, yes, you're acceptable? Or do I believe that He'll say, these are all the ways you're not in alignment with my word, and that part is not acceptable. And you must change. You must make your own choices better. And then the mercy would be to allow me to have that time in order to fix those things. That's where our mercy is. Mercy isn't looking at a wicked person and telling them, yeah, it's okay. I don't mind anymore. That's not even just. Do you think God will not be a just judge? I think He'll be just. And so, if we're running around telling ourselves that we can get away with doing whatever, we don't have to recognize roles, we don't have to obey laws, I'm sorry, He's not a respecter of persons, just like Nadav and Abihu got burnt up, right? So I'm sitting here thinking back to this gal, I'm thinking, what a shame this woman is speaking out, interrupted the conversation that two men were having, and this woman is interrupting and saying how wrong I am and all this and that, which I don't mind conversating about the Torah. But I'm thinking, what a shame it must be if her father would look upon her, or her husband. She didn't have a husband. It's just not the appropriate thing to do. What happened to the roles and positions? Do you think that I would just stand up when King David was talking and be like, hey, no, I think you got that wrong, blah, blah, blah? It's like, how stupid. I'm a man, he's a man. But he's in a position, and I would hopefully have that fear to know when to shut up and when to not say anything and respect those positions. There's all kinds of roles. It's not just man and woman. It's child and parent. It's our responsibility of being a parent to God and to our children. Like Mashiach washing the feet of His disciples. We have responsibility. We can do anything we want with our children. Just like Moshe. He was put in a difficult position when he struck the rock. Yes, are the people being wicked? Yes. But that doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want. He's still caught in between where he's more righteous than the people. But even in serving those people, which is part of his duty to God, he must do things the appropriate way. And that's what we get in this week's Parashat. They weren't allowed to grieve. They needed to finish doing their service to God, even though two of his sons just died. Right? Because that is important. Because respect is important. Because understanding your position is important. And you can't just decide you don't want to do it. Here was this woman, Michal, who spoke to the king of Israel and criticized him. That wasn't her place to do. Even if she thought she was right, she shouldn't have said anything. she should have the fear to say something. Right? And I see this all the time. Husbands and wives relationship. You know, one of the things that's difficult look, it's hard being a man and it's hard being a woman. Okay? They're just different roles. Someone could say, well, you're an authority, you know. Look how easy that is for you. Sure, you get to go around and be in charge. You want to know what's not fun? Having to correct somebody that you love and having them angry at you on a personal level, and you're doing your job that you have to do. Just like Moshe or Aharon having to carry out the services and doing the things that he has to do, even though his son's just died. Right? That's difficult. That's not a fun thing to do. It's kind of like the difference between being a boss and an employee. Now, I've been both. You know what's nice? When you're always the boss and you're always in charge and responsible for everything, and you're the bad guy who has to tell people to tuck their shirt in, or they showed up late, or you have to fire somebody, and people think, oh, just having power to be just so great, you know, you get to do all of this and that. That's a mentality of someone who hasn't had to have that role, because you know what's nice when you've been in charge a lot? Like, hey, it'd be nice just being an employee. Be able to just clock in, not have to deal with all of the junk, not be responsible for everything that's going wrong in the whole organization. You get to just clock in, do your job, and clock out and not worry about it when you go home. You don't have that ability when you're the leader. You don't have that ability when you're the boss. Whether you're there or you're not there, everything's your fault. You have an accountability that goes beyond your personal responsibility. You don't have that when you're an employee. And in the same way, the husband and the wife roles, you know, children don't have the responsibility of paying the bills. Okay? They do things that are right and wrong, they get spanked, they don't like it, they get rewarded, they do like that. Oh, it must be so tough because I got grounded. They think, how unfair. Oh, it'd be nice if I was making all the rules. They have no idea what they're talking about. Everybody wants a different role because they don't have that role and they think that role is something great. But God established these roles. And there's certain lessons that we learn in each role. There's lessons that I learned as a kid and things I didn't learn as a kid. Not until I became a parent did I start to understand the lessons and how bad of a kid I probably was. Things I didn't understand, didn't have the context to understand then. Then when you're sitting there griping, you know, at your parents, or you're the angry 15-year-old and you're arguing, oh, you know, blah, 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 you know, this. Well, wait till you get your, you know, that's what they usually say, wait till you get your 15-year-old. And it's true, because when you do, you learn and you understand, oh, wow, I was such a pain in the butt, and I was so wrong, but I thought I was so right back then. It's the same when we study the Torah. We all get to play different roles. The husband is in charge, but you know what? He's totally subservient to God. He plays the role of the bride, of the wife, to God who's above him. And the wife, she is subservient to her husband. Okay? But she's above the children. And she's an authority there. And with that comes responsibility. Up and down. Okay? All these roles teach us. And it's unjust judgment to look up and say, oh, you're not doing a good job leading me, to your husband. But the kids could probably say the same thing to the mother. Where are her sins she's not recognizing in what she's doing down, but she recognizes the sins going up? And then if her kids tell her, hey, what about this and that? She's like, oh, you don't talk that way to your mom. You see, these are all things we have to learn. These are all roles that we are put in that we have to understand. And we have to learn to respect them and fear those roles. But in the same way, Michal didn't respect and fear her role as a woman, her role as a citizen of Israel, but talking to the king of Israel, her role as a woman talking to a man. I mean, all these different things. She was wrong on many levels. I see this all the time. It isn't about being right, I can tell you that right now. You're not going to be able to say, well, but I was right. Because God respects those roles, and He puts those roles in authority. I mean, wasn't the argument with the serpent Hava and the serpent, wasn't that about, well, you know, what the serpent's saying is right. This will make me like Elohim. She has to believe that the serpent's right in order to make that choice. What she didn't respect was the roles that were given, that the serpent wasn't put in charge of her. It didn't matter if what the serpent said was right or wrong. She shouldn't be listening to the serpent. She should be listening to her husband, who should be listening to God. Okay? If people pay attention to the structures and the roles that God put up, we wouldn't have most of the problems that we do. When you break that down, right, that structure is like the door. When you open that door, sin enters in. When you change structures, when women lead the marriage and tell their husband how to, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. See, a woman has to learn how to allow her husband to make mistakes, because God is their teacher. They can give counsel for sure, but it's kind of like a video game. You know, there's somebody where you can't get past the level, and the person wants to take the controller and get past it for you, but you learn nothing. It isn't about having the right answer. If a woman is supporting her husband and believes she's got the right answer and he's got the wrong answer, she needs to give her opinion on the matter to help, and then at that point she also needs to respect, if her husband's saying, no, I want to do it this way, then she needs to say, yes, okay, and support him in doing that. And when he makes that failure and mistake, help him to learn. Be there for him so that he can learn, so that he becomes the great man that God wants him to be in that role, because he gave him that role of leadership. Why? Because what was Adam's problem in the beginning? He didn't hold to his role. He should have killed the serpent, rebuked his wife, and we wouldn't have the same problem that we have. Instead, he flip-flopped with his wife and let her be in charge, who let the serpent be in charge, and then she decided she was going to eat. And she became the authority and then gave to him, and he listened to her and ate as well. He became her helper. So his curse, it says right there in the book of Genesis, it says, because you listened to your wife. That's the opening part for his curse. So because he listened to his wife, right, and he didn't take his leadership role, his weakness was not being the leader that he needed to be. He's put in that position to grow and to learn those things, right? Mashiach said he doesn't come for those who are whole, he comes for those who are sick. So if man is put in a position of authority, because I believe he needs to learn that, because that's his weakness, he's not leading. So if you take the controller and say, and the woman says, oh, well, I'll lead for you, then he's not growing. He's not in learning from the position that God gave him. It isn't about whether he'll make the mistake. He probably will. He needs to, and he needs to grow, and he needs to learn. Now on the other side we had Hava. And Hava, her problem was what? Her problem was she wanted to be in charge. Right? It says her desire is to her husband, but he shall rule over you. See, her desire was to take the controller and be in charge. And that's what she did. And because of that, where's her position? Her position is in a lower role of authority. It's not the authority position, because sure, we are all learning to have all these things balanced in us. We need to know how to be a good leader and how to be a good servant. Two different things. We need to know how to lead and how to follow. You see, you look at the big scope of all the scriptures and you see, but we're weak in these various areas. So here the woman wanted to lead. And that's not where God wanted her. God wanted her to work on her weakness, which was that she wants to lead, and she needs to now learn how to serve and be a good servant. Just as a king, right, is commanded to write a copy of the Torah and read from every day. Because it's easy when you get in that position of power to stop being a good servant, to stop humbling yourself. Right? Those who desire to lead shall be servant of all. Mashiach got down and washed the feet of his disciples. Right? Because he's King of Kings. Why would he be a servant? Why? Because that's the wholeness. Is that a king should be the greatest servant. Because he's serving all the people. It's not just about the leader and everyone serving me. That's the way we think of it. And so people play to their strengths and avoid their weaknesses. So the man becomes subservient, which was his weakness. And you see that in relationships. You even see it in Messianic relationships, where the woman runs the household and the man's subservient. Why? Because that's what's natural. Because Hava naturally wanted to run the show, and Adam let her because he was lazy. Her problem is not serving. His problem is laziness, not leading. So if we're going to have successful relationships, then we need to understand what those relationships are and where our weaknesses is, and allow those to grow so that we can all come together as one. So that the woman who wants to lead but isn't learning how to be a good servant and teaching how to grow and taking correction, right? What happens to some leaders, right? Some leaders, if her problem was that she likes to be in charge, a lot of people get in charge, you can't tell them anything. They think they know everything. They let the power go to their head. Look at what he did with Moshe. He took Moshe, who is the humblest, he says, of all men on the earth, and he chose him to lead. So what's that teach us about the roles of leadership? That the person who is in charge needs to have that full balance of their personality. They need to have full development of their personality, which means that, yes, the person who is the leader needs to know how to be humbled, how to take correction, how to serve. These are the things that are going to be difficult for them. Focus on those. So, a woman's been given those things. A man, he's been lazy. Right? It's easier to listen to your wife than it is to correct her. I can tell you that right now. Because then you have to be the jerk. Then you have to be the person. Right? And it's the same way with the prophets. Isn't it easier when everyone's doing idolatry to just sit down and say, crazy people, but just let it be. Why put myself through it to stand up and try and tell everybody that God said not to do that? Then they're just going to want to kill me, blah, 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 right? But that's the problem. The problem is that there's not more people standing up saying, this is not according to the Word of God. And because that, right, it's just like Sodom and Gomorrah. If there were 10 righteous, if 10 people would stand up and say no. You know, I saw a thing posted, all the people posting the red equal signs, right? And it's like, people don't want to go out there and say, oh, no, I don't support it, because it costs nothing to say you support it. People think, oh, yeah, just live and let live, let blah, 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 blah. But if you come up and say, hey, you don't support it, oh, then you're a bigot, you're ignorant, you're all these things, backwards, old-fashioned, all this stuff, right? The homophobe. But it's like, no. Here is a nation that's going into wickedness. And no matter how many people sin, and then everybody says it's okay, doesn't make it okay. It just is all the people like the golden calf. Hey, if nobody here says, hey, this is an idol we're worshiping, then they actually won't, they'll believe that it's actually God that they're worshiping and that they're okay. But Moshe, one man, comes down and calls the wickedness that it was. And that one man, look at the impact he had on all the people. And it was a blessing. He's not trying to harm them. He's trying to help them. And that includes when they think, when they're doing evil to him while he's doing good to them by correcting them. He's the jerk who comes down and spoils the party. Doesn't mean be overzealous, because humility comes with that. There's a lot of people out there who think everyone else is wrong, but they think they're right. That's not the formula. That's not what I'm talking about at all. But the person who may be willing to share things and challenge other people's beliefs and all this, while at the same time remaining humble and saying, hey, I could be wrong here. but I think we should consider this, and here's why. That's the right attitude. And that humility comes from fear. And awareness that you're not good enough. And that's okay. Everyone's running around trying to pat themselves on the back and pat the backs of each other. Giving honor to each other. Oh, yes, Rabbi. I'll give you that title. I don't need a title. I don't want a title. People call me Rabbi. I don't call myself Rabbi. And generally when people call me Rabbi, I tell them, or Rav or anything of honor, I tell them I'm just a student. Isn't that the lowest level? And that's the accurate level I can claim. I study the Word of God. Do I have something to say? Yes. Because when you work in the field, it produces fruit. If you study a lot, year after year, you'll have more to say. You should. Right? There's a lot of people who want to run around and want to have people follow them and want to do all this and that. But, number one, they don't study that much. They may seem smart to people who study almost none, right? To the laziest people, they seem like, hey, these guys smart. I see it all the time. I see all these different theories and theologies coming up. Oh, I see the ones, the day, the day's just the day. It doesn't start the evening. It starts, the day risers, the lunar Sabbaths, the God's hidden calendar, all these different things. I see all kinds of these exotic doctrines and different things like that. And it's good to challenge things, and it's good to study things. But it's funny that the same people that want this super exotic doctrine are rarely grounded in the basics. Because it's easy to take that and say, oh, see, I found the hidden Sabbath, the hidden thing. That makes me important. No, find the basics. That'll make you a lot more important. You may not sell any DVDs. You may not get a ton of followers. You may not have the glory of men when you just tell people, hey, we should really focus on being on time. Because God's on time. Right? When He says it's going to happen, it happens. When He says I'm going to come back or I'm going to be there at such and such time, you can bet your life on it. But when we say, hey, I'm going to come over at 5. I show up at 5:08. No big deal. But it is a big deal because that's not being like God. And people don't think of the small things. Meanwhile, they want to talk about what's happening in the Gaza Strip and who the third rider of the apocalypse is. Who cares? They found a secret way of calculating God's calendar. Who cares? You're focusing on the wrong thing. Work on your basics. It's just like in basketball or something. People want to do a behind the back trick shot and all of that, and it's like, no. You know why Michael Jordan and the great basketball players were great? Because they mastered the fundamentals. Sit there and take 1,000 free throws. It's not exciting. Do 10,000 layups. Not exciting. But it'll make you a better player than coming out when you don't even have the basic skills. What's the point in doing a juke move if you can't even make the shot? It's a perfect example. Doing all these crazy moves to get away from your defender only puts you there, and then you miss the shot. There's no point to it. Learn to be an accurate shooter first. It's not exciting. It's fundamentals. But then it'll make sense to try and get open. Because once you do get open, you'll make your shot. It's the same way in the scriptures. Learn the basics. Don't go off and study 28 volumes of the Talmud before you've mastered the 5 books of Moshe. Okay? You shouldn't even be introduced to those things until you've studied the Torah alone for years. Okay? Don't tell me about the Kabbalistic understanding of XYZ when you don't even know the basic Torah. You don't even know the basics of what's going on in what parashats. Most people who feel they're pretty smart, I can ask them, they don't even know the 10 Commandments in order. Okay? That's insane. But they want to talk about the 10 Sephirot, or they want to talk about the secret Sabbath starts XYZ. Oh, did you know this? And actually there's a calculation. And oh, did you know about the Book of Thomas? Or, oh, did you know about this hidden scroll they found? Who cares? You don't have a context to put any of that information or to test it because you don't have your foundations right. This is how people act. And the foundation starts with a fear of YHWH. That's what this Torah portion, you want God to dwell with you, you start with a fear that God would dwell with you. Because you're not ready, because what's the fruit of that? It would force you to go back and study and say, oh my goodness, if God came back, I'd be unacceptable. I might be burned up for doing stupid things because I don't know what those things that I'm supposed to be doing. So that pushed me back. Now I have to study. Now I have to practice. Now I have to bear fruit. I have to have righteousness. I have to learn what righteousness is so that I can have it. And then God will test you on it. I can tell you that much. And then you'll refine that righteousness. You'll find the little flaws. You'll make mistakes. You'll repent. You'll come back again. You'll do all this and that. Then, when it's all done, just like the tabernacle, all the pieces are built. They've been tested and tried by the fire. And everything and the offerings and the sacrifices. And we're dressed right. And we're doing all that. Then the presence of YHWH will come down. And then hopefully 50% of your children won't be killed for doing something that they weren't commanded on the day that the presence finally comes down. That's what happened to Aaron, the high priest. You remember him? Yeah. Half of his sons died. The moment that the presence of YHWH came down. And so they did all this preparing, all this, raising them up from the time they're kid, teaching them God's ways, right? We got the commandments, we got the 10 commandments, we moved, we did all this stuff, right? Come Mashiach now, right? You know, they want God's presence down. God's presence come down. 2 of his sons are dead. 2 of the 4 of his sons. Half of his sons die. Do you think if he had it over to do again, he might say, you know, let's wait. Give me a little more time to work with my sons so they don't do something so stupid that they die. Forgive me for not being a good enough father, because I'm responsible for teaching them. How did this horrible thing happen? Do you think, knowing what he knows now, give me another few minutes. Let me get rid of that strange fire and let's slap my sons upside the head and get them over here, doing nothing than what was commanded. Do you think he would prefer to do that? Or do you think he was like, hey, come Mashiach now? Because asking for the presence of God to come before you're prepared is foolish. Instead, you should be afraid that you're not prepared enough and work harder on your preparations. So that when he does come, and he will come, that you'll be prepared.